Oram Vel had not felt fear in 60 years. He remembered the last time. A border skirmish near the Cathani Rift. A ship had exploded, close enough to rattle his teeth and turn his bioluminescence the color of old milk. 60 years ago. He had been younger then, and stupid, and stationed somewhere that mattered. Now he sat aboard the Pale Ledger, a monitoring station bolted to the edge of the Cathani corridor, like a barnacle on a dock post, watching trade ships crawl across his display in neat little lines. Thousands of them. Thorani grain haulers, Sithari mineral transports, Dawkin pleasure barges that moved like fat happy clouds. The corridor was the most congested shipping lane in concordance space, and the most boring assignment a fleet tactician could pull. He had earned this boredom, 400 years of writing papers about uncontacted species. 400 years of standing in front of councils and saying, what if something is out there that we haven't met? What if it grew without guidance? What if it did not receive the constraints? 400 years of polite nods and less polite laughter, and postings that got farther and farther from anything that mattered. His junior officer, a young Sethari named Piolin, was running sensor drills at the next console. She was eager and bright and reminded Oram of himself before the galaxy had sanded him down to a dull nub. Tactician Vel, Piolin said. Gravity distortion in Sector 9. Log it. Oram did not look up from his tea. Gravity distortions happened 6 times a day in the corridor. A big ship dropping out of FTL too close. A docking barge firing its waste thrusters at the wrong angle. Space hiccuped, and everyone moved on. It is large, sir. How large? Piolin did not answer. That was the first wrong thing. Piolin always answered. She answered questions that had not been asked. She answered questions that were meant for other people. Silence from Piolin was like silence from a river. It meant something had damned it. Oram looked up. The gravity reading on her display was not a line. It was a wall. A sheer vertical spike that ran off the top of the sensor graph and kept going into numbers their equipment did not have names for. The distortion was massive. Too massive for a ship. The computer had already classified it as a spatial anomaly. A fold in local spacetime, a natural event. Then it resolved. The thing that dropped out of FTL in the center of the Cathani corridor was not a spatial anomaly. It was not a natural event, and the word ship broke apart in Oram's mind, like a toy in the hand of something too strong. Because what sat in the middle of 12,000 trade vessels was not a ship the way a mountain was not a pebble. It was 3 kilometers long. The hull was dark and angular, built in hard lines and brutal slabs of metal that caught the corridor's starlight and threw it back like a closed fist. No curves, no elegance, no attempt to look like anything other than what it was. It looked like a weapon that someone had hollowed out and filled with runes. It looked like it had been designed by creatures who expected to be hit by something terrible and had decided, with great patience and zero imagination for beauty, to hit back harder. Every ship in the corridor stopped. Oram watched it happen on his display. Thousands of contacts, 12 species, vessels from civilizations that had not agreed on anything in 900 years. They all did the same thing, at the same moment. Engines cut, thrust zeroed, drift. Nobody gave an order. No protocol triggered. It was not coordination. It was instinct. The way a forest goes quiet when something with teeth walks through it. Oram looked down at his own arms. His bioluminescence had drained to gray. Every light on his body, the emotional display system his species had evolved over millions of years, had gone to the color of ash. His body had recognized something before his brain caught up. Predator. Sir, Piolin whispered. Her lights were gray too. What is that? Oram made himself breathe. He made himself sit up. He made his hands move to the sensor controls, and he began pulling data, because data was the thing he could hold, when everything else in his mind was running in circles and screaming. Mass. Wrong. The ship was too dense for its size, by a factor of 8. Its hull was layered. Dozens of stacked armor systems packed so tight the sensors read them as solid matter. Power output. The number came up and Oram stared at it and then closed the readout and opened it again. The number did not change. The ship's reactor was producing energy in a range that his instruments simply did not have words for. The display defaulted to scientific notation, and even that looked embarrassed. Weapons. Cold. All of them offline, but the capacitor banks behind them were visible on the scan, vast and quiet and ready, like a sleeping thing's claws tucked under its body. And it was broadcasting, on every frequency, every band, every protocol the Concordance used, plus a dozen nobody recognized. A looping message in a language no database in the known galaxy had ever recorded, structured on a mathematical framework. Prime numbers. Universal language. It was saying hello. The most dangerous object Oram had ever seen was introducing itself. He ran the weapons profile against the Concordance Naval Registry. All 14 member species, every active warship, every reserve fleet, every orbital defense platform. He asked the computer a simple question. How does this single vessel compare to our combined military strength? The computer generated a bar graph. One bar was a thin blue line representing the total combined firepower of the Concordance. The other bar left the screen. Oram stared at the empty space where the graph should have continued. His display had simply given up. He opened a priority channel to Concordance High Command. His hands were steady on the controls. That was training. 400 years of it. His voice was not steady. That was honesty. This is Fleet Tactician Oram Vel, stationed at the Pale Ledger, Vithani Corridor. I need to report a Criterion 7 contact. The silence that came back was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Then a voice, tight and careful. Tactician Vel, Criterion 7 is a theoretical classification. It has never been applied. Oram looked at the ship on his viewport. 3 kilometers of dark metal, sitting in a field of frozen traffic, broadcasting hello, patient, waiting. It is not theoretical anymore. He closed the channel and sat in the gray light of his own skin, and listened to the quiet of 12,000 ships that had forgotten how to move. In 400 years, no one had believed him. He wished with every cell of his old and tired body. Captain Elara Voss held her coffee with both hands and watched the navigation hologram fill up with dots. There were a lot of dots. Captain, said Commander Harlan Beck, her executive officer, leaning forward in his chair, with the look of a man who had just opened a door and found a surprise party he was not dressed for. I think we found the neighborhood. Voss did not smile. She counted. It was an old habit, born on a mining colony where you counted the oxygen tanks every morning and the headstones every evening. You counted things before you trusted them. She counted the ships. Then she counted the weapons profiles her sensors could identify. Then she counted the ones they could not identify, which was worse, because a weapon you could not recognize was a weapon you could not plan for. 3,000 contacts, said Lieutenant Yara Osei from the sensor station. No. 3,200. No. They are still resolving. Captain, there are a lot of ships out here. I can see that, Lieutenant. Permission to say holy crap, ma'am. Granted. The Aegis of Prometheus sat in the middle of it all. 3 kilometers of human engineering. Voss had served on her for 11 years, and she still got lost sometimes on the way to the gym. The ship had its own weather system in the main hangar bay. Actual clouds formed near the ceiling when the humidity controls drifted. Voss had once watched a junior engineer try to file a maintenance report about an indoor rain shower and give up halfway through because the form did not have a checkbox for internal precipitation. To Voss, the Aegis was large, She knew that, but large was relative. Back in Sol, the Aegis was one of 4 Titan-class vessels. Her sister ships were the Thermopylae, the Iron Cradle, and the Mara Sav, which had been named by an admiral who had lost a bet. The fleet had 40 dreadnoughts behind them, 200 cruisers, 1,000 frigates. Humanity had been building for 200 years, and they had built with the enthusiasm of a species that expected the front door to break down at any moment. They did not know that no other civilization in the galaxy built ships longer than 400 meters. They did not know that something called the developmental constraints existed, a set of quiet agreements passed from older species to younger ones that said things like, do not build reactors above this threshold. Do not develop weapons past this yield. Do not make your ships so large that they distort local gravity. Do not reach too far, or grow too fast, or become something that the galaxy cannot absorb. Every species in the Concordance had received these rules. A neighbor had visited. An older hand had reached down and said, here, this is how we do things. These are the lines you do not cross. And the reason is that if everyone crosses them, the whole structure falls apart. Humanity had never received that visit. Humanity had grown up in a silent house with no parents, and no rules and no one to say stop. They had looked out into the dark, and seen nothing and heard nothing, and the nothing had terrified them so completely and so deeply that they had spent 2 centuries building the biggest, heaviest, most brutally over-engineered arsenal a species had ever constructed. Not because they were warlike, because they were scared, and nobody had ever come to tell them they could be less scared. Nobody had ever come at all. So the Aegis of Prometheus sat in the Vithani corridor, with its weapons cold and its shields down, and its captain holding a coffee mug that said #1mom, and its crew had absolutely no idea that they were at this moment the single most frightening thing the galaxy had ever seen. Why isn't anyone answering? Voss asked. Her communications officer, a wiry man named Desmond Cho, shook his head. The hail is clean, Captain. Broadcasting on all standard mathematical frameworks. Primes, universal constants, the whole welcome package. We're loud and clear. He tapped his screen. Nobody is talking back. Nobody? Not a whisper. 3,200 ships, and every single one of them has gone to 0 thrust and 0 comms. Voss looked at the hologram. All those dots. A highway full of cars, and every single one of them had pulled over and killed the engine. Maybe they are shy, Beck offered. Voss shook her head. That is not shy, she said. She had read enough history. She had read about the way animals froze when a hawk's shadow crossed the ground. She had read about the way villages went quiet when an army appeared on the ridge. That kind of silence had a name. It was not shyness. It was the silence of things that were hoping very hard not to be noticed. She set down her coffee. She looked at the mug and the cheerful text on its side, and turned it so the bridge camera would not pick it up. Cho, keep the hail running. Beck, I want all weapons locked cold. Nothing hot, nothing warm, nothing that could be misread. Osei, give me a full passive scan of the nearest station. The scan came back. A monitoring platform. Small, government or military. 1 vessel was detaching from it. Tiny against the backdrop of frozen traffic. It moved toward them at a speed that was either cautious or terrified, and Voss suspected it was both. 1 ship, Beck said. Just 1. Coming to say hello. Or coming to get a closer look before they decide what to do about us, Voss said. The small vessel stopped 500 kilometers out. Close enough for communication. Far enough to run. Voss noticed the distance. She was good with distances. On the mining colony, you learn the distance between yourself and the airlock, because that number was the distance between life and death. You learn the distance between yourself and someone you did not trust, because that number was everything. 500 kilometers. That was the distance you kept from something you were afraid of. She straightened her uniform. She checked her pocket without thinking about it. Her fingers brushed paper, folded small, warm from being close to her body for months. She did not take it out. "All right," she said to the bridge. Her voice was calm. 11 years of command had taught her that the crew took their temperature from her, and she intended to be room temperature, even if her insides were doing something closer to a reactor breach. "We have a guest coming. Let us make a good first impression. And somebody clean up the coffee station. It looks like a crime scene back there." The small alien vessel hung in the dark. 500 kilometers of nothing between it and the Aegis. Voss waited. She was very good at waiting. She had been waiting for 200 years, along with every other human who had ever looked up at the night sky and asked the same question. "Is anyone out there?" Someone was out there, and they were scared. Voss understood being scared. She just wished she knew what they were scared of. She would figure that out soon enough. And it would be the kind of answer that made her wish she had not asked. Oram Vel sat in the shuttle and told himself that he was not flying into the mouth of something that could swallow civilizations. He was not doing a good job of it. The diplomatic shuttle was a Concordance standard model, 12 meters long, comfortable seating for 6. A small refreshment unit that dispensed a warm drink his species found calming. He had not touched the drink. His hands would not have held the cup. They had been shaking since the shuttle detached from the pale ledger, and he had gotten his first unfiltered look at the human vessel through the forward viewport. It was bigger up close. That should not have been possible. He had seen the measurements. He knew the dimensions. 3 kilometers. He had read the number and understood the number, and the number had meant nothing, because numbers were abstractions, and this was not abstract. This was a wall of dark metal that filled the viewport from edge to edge and kept going past the edges, and he could not see where it ended in either direction. The shuttle's navigation system had plotted their approach course, and the estimated time to reach the docking port was 14 minutes. 14 minutes of flying alongside the hull. 14 minutes of watching armor plating scroll past like landscape seen from a train window. "Tactician," said Piolan from the pilot's seat. She had insisted on coming. He had not argued, because arguing required energy, and he had spent all of his energy on not screaming. "They have opened a docking bay." "Which one?" "Bay 7. They have, Tactician, they have 42 docking bays." "Of course they do." The shuttle turned toward the bay, and Oram saw the interior lights spill out, like a golden mouth opening in the dark hull. The bay was large enough to hold the pale ledger inside it, not just the shuttle. The entire monitoring station. It would have fit with room left over for parking. As they approached, the Aegis allowed a full sensor sweep. Oram had not requested one. The humans had simply opened their systems to scanning, the way a person might open their coat to show they carried no weapons. It was a gesture of trust. Oram wished they had not made it, because every reading that came back was worse than the one before it, and each one made the thing in his chest, that was not quite panic, but was closely related to panic, grow a little larger and a little heavier. The hull. He started with the hull, because the hull was supposed to be simple. Metal, armor, a skin to keep space out and air in. The hull of the Aegis of Prometheus was not a skin. It was an archaeology project. Layers, dozens of them, stacked and bonded and interwoven, each one a different composite, each one designed to absorb or deflect or disperse a different type of damage. Kinetic, thermal, radiation, electromagnetic. Types of damage Oram did not recognize. Built to stop weapons that did not exist in Concordance space. The humans had armored their ship against threats they had not yet met. They had imagined every way the universe might try to kill them, and had built an answer to each one. The weapons, they were cold. Every array offline, every launcher sealed, every turret locked in neutral position. Peaceful. but the capacitor banks behind them glowed on the sensor sweep like furnaces banked for the night. Those banks could power a small star. They sat in the belly of the ship, patient, full, waiting for someone to open the valve. Oram had seen weapon systems on Concordance warships. He had helped design some of them. Those systems were tools. These were the engineering equivalent of a creature that had spent its entire evolutionary history being hunted, and had finally, after millions of years, grown claws large enough to hunt back. The point defense grid. Oram ran the scan twice, because the first time his computer classified the results as a surface feature. Not a weapon system. Terrain. The grid was so dense, so thoroughly integrated into the hull, that the computer thought it was looking at the physical texture of the ship itself. Thousands of small turrets, fast tracking, overlapping fields of fire. Anything that came within range of that ship without permission would be picked apart like bread thrown to fish. The fighter bays. Internal. Hidden. Oram found them on deep scan only because the humans had left them open to inspection. Thousands of small combat craft nestled in rows inside the ship like seeds inside a fruit. Each one, by itself, was more heavily armed than a Concordance frigate. He ran the comparison. He had to. It was his job. It had been his job for 400 years, and the numbers were the one thing that did not lie to him, even when they said things he did not want to hear. One ship, the Aegis of Prometheus, won against the combined active naval forces of all 14 Concordance species. Every warship, every defense platform, every reserve fleet, everything. The Aegis won. The bar graph on his display tried to show the comparison, and one bar was a thin line, and the other bar exited the display boundary, and his computer put a small arrow at the edge of the screen, indicating that the value continued in a direction it could not render. Oram sat in the shuttle in the dark glow of his own gray skin, and he breathed, and he thought about 400 years of warning people about this exact scenario, and how he had always hoped, somewhere in the part of himself that was still young and still stupid, that he was wrong. "Tactician," Piolan said, "are you all right?" "They sent a greeting ship," Oram said. His voice was quiet. "This is what they bring when they want to introduce themselves. This is their handshake." He looked at the fighter bays, the layered armor, the sleeping weapons that could crack moons. "This is not even their war fleet, Piolan. This is the ship they felt comfortable showing us. The one they thought would make a good first impression." Piolan's lights went gray. The shuttle docked. The bay was warm and bright, and smelled like metal and something Oram could not identify, that was sharp and not unpleasant. The artificial gravity caught them gently, a kindness they did not have to offer. Guides appeared on the floor, soft lights leading toward an airlock at the far end. They walked. Oram's 6 legs moved in the steady rhythm he used for formal occasions, because formal rhythm was the only thing keeping him upright. The airlock ahead of them was standard size, human size, small. It opened. On the other side stood a human, a woman. She was short, not short for a human, Oram would learn later, short by any measure, a compact creature in a pressed uniform with dark hair pulled back, and eyes that were calm and warm and completely unremarkable. She was smiling, not a large smile, not a performance. The kind of smile a person gives when they have been hoping to meet you. She extended her hand. One hand. 5 fingers. No claws, no armor, no visible weapons. Just skin and bone and a gesture that meant, as far as Oram could tell, "I am not holding anything that could hurt you." A translation device crackled between them, rough and new, crunching 2 languages together for the first time in history. "We have been looking for you for a very long time," she said. Oram's bioluminescence did something he could not control. It cycled, fast, through colors that his species used for emotions they did not have public words for. Fear, awe, recognition, the deep old animal awareness of standing in front of something that could end you, and choosing to stand there anyway. He was glowing, bright enough to be seen through the shuttle's viewport. Bright enough that every Concordance ship watching the feed from the corridor could see him, a beacon of light pulsing in the doorway of the most powerful warship ever built, broadcasting his terror to the galaxy in colors they all understood. He could not stop. The human woman looked at his lights with an expression he did not yet have the context to read. It was not fear. It was not triumph. It was something gentler. Something like the look of a person who had knocked on a door for a very long time and had finally heard footsteps on the other side. "My name is Alara Voss," she said. "Welcome aboard." Oram made his voice work. It took everything he had. "I am Fleet Tactician Oram Vel." A pause. "Your ship is very large." Voss looked over her shoulder at the corridor behind her, as though seeing it for the first time. "I suppose it is," she said, and she sounded like she meant it, like the size of her own warship had never fully occurred to her as something unusual. That was the moment Oram understood. They did not know. They did not know what they were. Ambassador Keth Yandri had negotiated the end of 3 wars, the merger of 2 economies, and a border dispute that had lasted longer than most species had existed. He had never failed. Not once. His record was clean and complete, and he carried it the way his people carried their carapace, as a thing that was part of his body and could not be removed without killing him. He boarded the Aegis of Prometheus 12 hours after first contact, and he inspected a war room. He found a cafeteria. The meeting space Captain Voss had chosen was the ship's mess hall on Deck 14. It was enormous. Long tables stretched in rows under warm lighting, and the ceiling was high enough that the air near the top carried a faint haze. Humans sat at the surrounding tables, eating, talking. One of them was laughing so hard that liquid came out of her nose, and her companions were laughing at that. Another was holding up a small glass screen and showing the person beside him an image of a round, furry animal with a flat face and enormous eyes. The other person made a sound that Ket's translator rendered as a high-pitched squeal of delight. The most powerful warship in the history of the galaxy smelled like baked bread and something savory and warm that Keth could not name. Voss met him at a table near the center of the room. She had a tray of food in front of her. She stood when he approached. The gesture was formal, but her posture was not. She moved like a person in her own home, comfortable, easy, the kind of relaxation that either meant she trusted him or she did not consider him a threat. Keth was not sure which interpretation was worse. "Ambassador," Voss said, "thank you for coming. Please, sit. We don't know your dietary needs yet, but our science team is very excited about figuring that out." Keth said. He sat. His thorax plates adjusted with a soft click. He placed his diplomatic case on the table and opened it, and began to lay out the documents he had prepared, because preparation was the thing he held on to when the universe was being unreasonable. "I bring the standard framework of the Galactic Concordance," he said. 14 species, 900 years of cooperative governance. I am authorized to offer humanity provisional membership pending agreement on core terms." "That's very kind," Voss said. She picked up something from her tray, a piece of bread. She tore it in half and ate one piece while she listened. The casualness of it was either a power move or a complete lack of awareness that this was the most consequential diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Keth could not tell. Territorial boundaries, trade agreements, mutual defense clauses, information sharing protocols. Voss listened. She asked questions that were specific and intelligent. She understood power structures. She understood economics. Keth found himself against his training and his better judgment, liking her. Then he reached the developmental constraints. These are the agreed limitations on technological development, Keth said. He slid the document across the table. Every member species accepts these terms. They are the foundation of stability. They ensure that no single civilization develops capabilities that could destabilize the balance of power. Voss read the list. Her face changed. Not anger. Keth would have understood anger. This was something else. Her brow creased. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes moved back to the top of the list and read it again, slower this time. The way a person rereads something they believe they have misunderstood. "You're asking us to stop building," she said. "We are asking all species to build within agreed parameters. FTL drives above Class 4 are prohibited. Directed energy weapons above 40 terawatts are prohibited. Self-replicating construction systems are prohibited. Autonomous weapons platforms above. We broke every one of these before we left our home system." The mess hall was still loud. Humans still laughed and ate and showed each other pictures of animals with flat faces. But at the table between Keth and Voss, a silence opened up that had its own weight and temperature, and Keth felt it settle on him like a physical thing. He stopped. He recalculated. "You developed Class 4 FTL before interstellar travel? We have been using Class 6 for about 80 years now. Class 6 does not exist. It does where we come from." Keth looked at the list again. Directed energy above 40 terawatts. Humanity's standard ship-to-ship batteries operated at 300. Self-replicating construction. Humanity had built their first self-replicating shipyard before Voss was born. Autonomous weapons platforms. The Aegis carried 6,000 of them in its fighter bays. Every line on the list, every carefully negotiated 900-year-old agreement that held the galaxy in its careful, fragile balance, broken. All of them. Not in defiance, not in rebellion, in ignorance. They had never received the constraints. No older species had visited them. No mentor had arrived with gentle rules and quiet warnings. They had grown up alone in the dark, and they had built whatever they needed to survive. And nobody had ever told them there were limits, because nobody had ever come. "Captain Voss," Keth said. He was choosing his words the way a surgeon chose incisions. "May I ask you something directly? Please. Why did your species build like this?" Voss set down the bread. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She reached toward her pocket and touched something through the fabric, and then put her hand back flat on the surface. "Because we were alone," she said. "For 200 years we sent signals into the dark, and nothing answered. We built telescopes and pointed them at every star we could reach, and found nothing. We searched for ruins, for signals, for any evidence that someone else was out there. We found silence." She paused. "Do you know what silence does to a species, Ambassador? Not quiet, not peace. Silence. The total absence of any answer to the question, is there anyone else? Because when no one answers, you start to wonder why, and the reasons you come up with are not comforting. Maybe everyone else is dead. Maybe something killed them. Maybe that something is still out there. Maybe it is coming for you." The mess hall noise washed around them. Laughter. The clatter of trays. "So we built," Voss said. "We built walls and weapons and ships and shields, and we armored ourselves against every nightmare we could imagine, because the silence left us no choice but to imagine. We built until we were not afraid anymore." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "That is not true. We never stopped being afraid. We just built until the fear had something to hide behind." Keth sat very still. His mandibles were locked. His plates were drawn tight against his body. He had come to this table with 900 years of diplomatic framework, and he understood now, in the chemical clarity of a revelation he could not unfeel, that the framework was useless. You could not constrain a species that had built itself in the absence of all constraint. You could not draw lines for a civilization that had never known lines existed. You could not tell the creature that had grown in the dark to be smaller. You could only decide how to live beside it. He excused himself. He stood in a corridor outside the mess hall and composed his report to the concordance. His hands were precise. His language was exact. His recommendation was the most radical thing he had ever written in a career that spanned 600 years of cautious, measured, meticulous diplomacy. Do not restrict them. Do not threaten them. Do not surround them or contain them or make them feel that the galaxy is hostile to their existence. Because the thing that built this ship was not aggression. It was loneliness. It was the terror of a species that grew up without a single hand extended in friendship, and concluded that the universe wanted them dead. If you make them feel alone again, they will build something worse. I have seen what they built out of fear. You do not want to see what they build out of certainty. He filed the report. He stood in the corridor and listened to the humans on the other side of the wall. Someone had started a song, and others had joined, and the melody was rough and imperfect and warm, and it traveled through the metal walls of the most dangerous machine in the galaxy, like light through a window. Ket's faith taught him that the universe had a design, that the constraints were natural, that order was inherent and divine, and the shape of civilization was the shape the cosmos intended. The humans broke all of that. They were living proof that the order was a choice, that the constraints were not divine law, but a fence built by frightened neighbors, that the universe had no design, that species could grow without limit and the galaxy would not collapse, that the ceiling was not a ceiling. It was just an agreement among people who had never met the thing that lived below the floor. Keth did not spiral. His species did not spiral. They incorporated new data, and they moved forward because the alternative was paralysis, and paralysis was extinction by another name. He went back into the mess hall. He sat down across from Voss. She looked at him with those calm, warm, unremarkable eyes. "I filed my report," he said. "I recommended they leave you alone." "Thank you," she said. "That seems like it would be best for everyone." "Captain Voss, your species has broken my religion." She blinked. "I'm sorry." "Do not be. A faith that cannot survive new evidence was already dead." Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then she pushed her tray toward him. On it was a piece of the bread, still warm. "Would you like to try this?" she said. "It is not very good, but it is ours." Keth took the bread. He held it in his forelimbs. It was soft and warm, and it smelled like the thing the humans had built their warship to protect. He ate it. It was not very good, but it was theirs. 3 days after first contact, Orem Vel stopped sleeping. It was not the fear that kept him awake. The fear had burned through him in the first hours and left behind something quieter, something that sat in his chest like a stone he had swallowed and could not cough up. He sat in his quarters aboard the pale ledger, and he read. The humans had shared their database, all of it. History, science, art, music, literature. Centuries of a civilization laid open like a body on a table. Every organ visible, every scar exposed. They had shared it the way they had opened their ship to scanning, freely, without hesitation, as though they had nothing to hide, or did not understand that what they were showing was terrifying. Orem started with the wars. They fought over land and resources, and gods, and ideas, and the color of their skin, and the shape of their borders, and things so small and so stupid that Orem's translator struggled to render them into concepts his species had words for. They had built weapons that could crack the crust of their own planet, and they had pointed those weapons at each other, and they had come within minutes of using them, more than once. He found the genocides. He read about them with the clinical attention of a military analyst, and his bioluminescence went dark and stayed dark for an hour. He found the art, paintings made by hands that shook, music that did things to his auditory processing that he did not have categories for. A symphony that built and broke open into something so large and so heavy that he sat in the dark with his lights cycling colors he had never seen on his own skin. His species had not needed them before. He found a video file, short, low quality, a human child, small, maybe 4 or 5 years old by their aging system, sitting on a floor next to a large furry animal. The child was singing. The animal was lying with its head on the child's lap. The song had no words, just a melody, wandering, improvised, the kind of thing a small creature makes up when it doesn't know anyone is listening. Oram watched it 4 times. He found the nuclear tests, bright expanding spheres of fire that ate the sky. He found a photograph of a single man standing in front of a column of armored vehicles, his body impossibly small against the machines, not moving. He found a recording of a woman speaking to a crowd of 1 million people about a dream she had for the future, and her voice shook, and the crowd was silent, and then they were not silent. He closed the database. He sat in the dark. He understood them now, not completely, not in the way you understand something you have lived, but enough. They were not conquerors. They were not monsters. They were not the galactic predator his scenarios had predicted. They were afraid children who had learned to build gods out of metal because no parent ever came. The Concordance Assembly convened on the 4th day. 14 species, 900 years of shared governance. The chamber was vast, a ring of elevated platforms surrounding a central floor, each platform occupied by the delegates of a different civilization. The air was thick with translation fields that hummed and crackled as a dozen languages fought for space. The vote was on the integration proposal. Accept humanity into the Concordance under modified terms, no developmental constraints, phased diplomatic integration, cultural exchange, mutual defense. Half the assembly supported it. The other half wanted the existential quarantine protocol. Surround humanity's territory. Restrict their expansion. Contain them. Bottle the genie. Hope. Pray. Oram stood on the central floor and looked up at 14 species looking down at him, and he felt very old and very small and very tired of being right about things he wished were wrong. I will make this simple, he said. His bioluminescence was controlled, steady blue, professional. The quarantine fleet would need to be larger than every navy in the Concordance combined. Build it. Take the 10 years it would require. Strip your economies bare and build it. He paused. I give it a 30% chance of success. Murmurs, lights flickering on alien skin, mandibles clicking. And if we fail, Oram continued, we will have confirmed the only thing that has ever truly frightened them. That the universe is hostile, that they are alone, that the silence they endured for 200 years was not empty. It was full of things that wanted them dead. He let the silence in the chamber do its work. I have read their history, all of it. Every war, every weapon, every act of desperate, creative, brilliant, terrible violence they have committed, against each other and against the laws of physics themselves. And I am telling you, with 400 years of experience, that everything they have built so far, everything that frightens us, every impossible ship, an impossible weapon, and impossible technology, they built all of it out of fear. His lights shifted, warm, sad. You do not want to see what they build out of certainty. The vote took 3 hours. It passed. Integration, barely. 7 species for, 5 against, 2 abstentions. The margin was so thin it could have been cut by a careless word. Keth Yandri stood on his platform and watched the result register on the central display. He had cast his vote for integration. His delegation had protested. His species theological council had sent him 9 formal objections, each one longer and angrier than the last. He had read them all. He had filed them in the appropriate archive. He had voted his conscience. His conscience was an unfamiliar thing these days. The constraints had been the bedrock of his faith, the natural order, the divine design, the shape the universe intended for its children. And then a species had walked out of the dark and broken every rule, and the universe had not collapsed. The ceiling had not fallen. The design had not shattered. Because there was no design. There were only frightened species drawing lines on empty space and calling them sacred. Keth went to the Aegis. He found Voss in a corridor near the observation deck. She was alone, walking with her hands in her pockets, and she looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and are not sure they can put it down yet. The vote passed, he told her. I heard, she said. Thank you for what you did. I broke my faith for it. I know. I'm sorry about that. I told you not to be. I know. I'm sorry anyway. That seems like the kind of thing a person should be sorry about, even if you tell them not to. Keth clicked his mandibles. It was the Thorani equivalent of a laugh. He had not expected to laugh today. He had not expected to laugh in the presence of the species that had broken his theology and terrified his civilization and smelled like baked bread. Your bread is still not very good, he said. We are working on it, she said. The viewport stretched the full width of the ship. A window 300 meters long that looked out onto the Vathani corridor. Traffic was moving again. Ships in their lanes. Trade flowing. The frozen stillness of 4 days ago had thawed, and the galaxy was doing what the galaxy did, moving, living, carrying things from one place to another, and pretending that everything was normal. Oram was already there. He stood at the viewport with his 6 limbs folded and his bioluminescence low and steady. He looked like a monument, something carved and placed there to mark a spot where something important had happened. Voss stood beside him. They looked out together. 2 species, 4 days old, as neighbors. 900 years behind one and 200 behind the other, and the whole of the dark between them, and somehow they were standing in the same room and breathing the same air. And that fact alone was enough to make the dark a little smaller. Captain Voss, Oram said, what does the name of your ship mean? Voss tilted her head. Prometheus? Yes. He was a figure from our mythology, one of the old stories. He was a titan, a being of great power, and he stole fire from the gods and gave it to mortals, to ordinary people, so they could see in the dark, so they could cook food and forge tools and survive. The gods punished him for it. They chained him to a rock and sent a bird to eat his liver every day, and every night it grew back, and every day the bird came again. Oram was quiet for a long time. You named your greatest warship after someone who was tortured for bringing light to others. Yes, that is a very human thing to do. Voss looked at him. Is that good? Oram's bioluminescence shifted. A color Voss had not seen before. Not the gray of fear. Not the cycling chaos of their first meeting. Something new. Warm. Steady. It started at his core and spread outward through all 6 limbs until his whole body glowed with it, soft and golden, like a lantern in a window. Yes, he said, I think it is. Voss did not know what the color meant. She would learn later that it was the oldest word in the Sithari light language, a word so old it predated their spoken tongue. It meant recognition between equals. It meant, I see what you are, and I am not afraid. Right now, standing in the glow of it, she just thought it was pretty. She reached into her pocket. She touched the letter. The paper was soft now, worn thin by months of being held and folded and pressed close. Her daughter's handwriting. Messy. The border drawn in crayon, purple and green, because those were the colors that were closest when she reached into the box. The words simple and misspelled and perfect. Mom, please make a friend out there. I drawed you a picture of what the alien looks like. I gave it 5 arms because 5 is my favorite number. The drawing showed a stick figure with 5 arms and a big smile. It was holding hands with another stick figure labeled Mom in crooked capital letters. Between them, drawn in yellow crayon with the hard-pressed confidence of a child who was absolutely certain about the color of space, were stars. She put it back in her pocket. She did not take it out. She did not show it to anyone. She did not need to. The weight of it against her chest was enough. It had always been enough. The Aegis of Prometheus held position in the Vethani corridor. Around it, the galaxy moved. Ships flew. Species talked. Messages crossed the dark in languages that were learning, slowly, clumsily, with great effort and occasional hilarity, to understand each other. Somewhere in the ship, a human was teaching a Thorani how to make bread. It was still not very good. But they were working on it. And for the first time in 200 years, the dark did not feel so big.